In the spring of 330 before Christ, 5,000 camels and 20,000 mules carried away the gold of Persepolis, and then someone lit a fire that consumed in a single night what 3 generations of kings had spent nearly 2 centuries building. The greatest ceremonial complex ever raised in the ancient Near East, a terrace of polished limestone covering 125,000 square meters, crowned by 72 columns, each rising nearly 20 meters into the sky, collapsed into charred rubble and silence. The cedar beams imported from Lebanon fed the flames, the gold leaf melted, the painted plaster blackened and fell. And for more than 2,000 years afterward, the people who lived on the plain below called these ruins the throne of Jamshid, attributing them not to any historical king, but to a figure of myth. How does the world forget who built such a place? And what kind of empire demands a capital built not for commerce or war, but purely for the performance of its own grandeur? This is the complete story of Persepolis. Not a fragment, not a single moment frozen in time. We will walk through the entire life of this extraordinary place, from the first decision made by Darius I around 518 before Christ to raise a new kind of capital on the plain of Marv-Dasht, through every phase of its construction, its decades of splendor, its catastrophic end, and its long resurrection from the earth. We will stand on the highland plain beneath the mountain of mercy and understand why this ground was chosen, shielded by the Zagros range, fed by seasonal streams, close to the tomb of Cyrus at Pasargadae. We will watch the terrace rise from quarried limestone, see the Apadana take shape column by column, and read the foundation tablets buried in gold and silver beneath its floors. We will examine the staircase reliefs where 23 subject nations walk forever in stone, each carved with such precision that scholars can identify their garments, their hairstyles, their tribute gifts. We will enter the world revealed by over 30,000 clay tablets found in the fortification walls, administrative records that tell us the names and wages of workers, the rations given to mothers who had just given birth, the travel authorizations of officials crossing an empire that stretched from the Indus to the Nile. We will witness the annual Novruz procession, the ritual heartbeat of Achaemenid power, and then we will watch Alexander's army climb the grand stairway, empty the treasury vaults, and set fire to the halls. We will follow the centuries of silence, the slow burial under wind-blown dust, the transformation of history into legend. And finally, we will stand beside Ernst Herzfeld in 1931 as his excavation trenches reveal the Apadana staircase intact beneath the rubble, the tribute-bearers still walking, still carrying their gifts, after 2,500 years underground. What makes Persepolis irreplaceable is not merely its scale or its beauty. It is what the stones declare about the nature of empire itself. Here, carved into limestone with extraordinary care, is the portrait of a state that governed dozens of peoples and chose to represent them all. Every nation sees its own image on these walls. This was not erasure, but inclusion made monumental. Without Persepolis, we would lack our clearest window into how the ancient world imagined unity across difference, and how fragile such visions prove when armies arrive. If you find yourself drawn to complete journeys through the great cities of the ancient world, subscribe to this channel. Each week we bring back to life a world built in limestone and cedar, bronze and gold, and we stay until the last stone has spoken. Let us begin where empires begin, with the ground itself, and the king who looked across a highland plain and saw a throne waiting to be carved from the living rock. The plain of Marv Dasht opens like a hand held upward to receive the sky. It stretches nearly 40 kilometers across the highland plateau of Fars, ringed on 3 sides by the folds of the Zagros range, and on its eastern edge a single limestone ridge rises, Kue Rahmat, the Mountain of Mercy. Seasonal streams descend from these heights each spring, carrying snowmelt into channels that have watered this ground for millennia. The soil is deep, the winters cold but short, the summers dry and golden. This is the heartland of the Persian people, the territory they called Parsa, and it is here, not in conquered Babylon, not in distant Susa, that the story of the greatest ceremonial capital of the ancient world begins. Cyrus II, whom later ages called the Great, chose this same highland region when he built Pasargadae in the middle of the 6th century before the Common Era. After his conquest of the Median Empire, after Lydia fell and Babylon opened its gates in 539, Cyrus planted his royal gardens and audience halls on the Murghab plain, some 40 kilometers northeast of where Persepolis would later rise. His tomb still stands there, a gabled limestone chamber on a stepped plinth, austere and silent, facing the wind. Pasargadae was a statement of dynastic origin, a place where the new king of the world anchored himself to ancestral ground. But Cyrus died on campaign in 530. His son Cambyses conquered Egypt and perished returning home. In 522, after months of civil war and the suppression of revolts across 19 provinces, Darius, son of Hystaspes, seized the throne. He was Achaemenid by lineage, but not of the direct royal line. He needed legitimacy carved in stone. At Behistun, high on a cliff face above the road from Babylon to Ecbatana, he ordered his victories inscribed in 3 languages, Old Persian, Elamite, and Akkadian, with a relief showing him triumphant over rebel kings. That was propaganda for travelers. But Darius required something more permanent, more total. He required a place where the empire itself could be made visible. He did not choose Pasargadae. That city belonged to Cyrus, and Darius needed his own ground. He did not choose Susa, though he rebuilt it magnificently. Susa was administrative, lowland, Elamite in its bones. He looked instead to the Marv Dasht plain, to the foot of the Mountain of Mercy, where a natural limestone outcrop offered elevation, where the mountain shielded the site from northern winds, where water could be channeled from the Sivand and Pulva rivers, and where the royal road from Susa could deliver delegations from every corner of the empire into the highland air of Persia itself. Around 518 before the Common Era, Darius gave the order. The site would not be a living city in the ordinary sense, no great bazaar, no harbour, no permanent urban population in the tens of thousands. It would be something the ancient world had never seen, a terrace raised against the mountain, a platform of dressed stone vast enough to hold the ritual heart of an empire that stretched from the Indus to the Nile. Every subject people would climb its stairs. Every nation would see itself reflected in carved stone. The empire would gather here each spring, at the turning of the year, and perform its own unity under the gaze of the King of Kings. The plain waits, the mountain watches, the streams run clear with snowmelt. And on this ground, within a generation, workers from a dozen nations will raise columns taller than any standing in Greece, carve stairways bearing the portraits of 23 peoples, and build a throne so magnificent that its destruction 2 centuries later will echo through every history written since. But that destruction is far away. For now there is only the plain, the mountain, and a king's decision to make empire eternal in stone. The work begins around 518 before the Common Era. Darius has chosen his ground, the southwestern flank of Kuh-e-Rahmat, where the mountain's lower slope meets the alluvial plain. Here the bedrock rises naturally, a shelf of grey limestone already elevated above the flatland. But nature has not made it level. The king's engineers must transform this uneven ridge into something unprecedented. A platform 455 meters long, 300 meters wide, raised 13 meters above the surrounding earth at its highest point, a mountain made by human hands. The quarries open first. Stonemasons cut directly into the flank of Kuh-e-Rahmat itself, extracting massive blocks of the same blue-grey limestone that forms the mountain's bones. The marks of their tools remain visible today. The drill holes, the wedge channels where wooden pegs were driven in and soaked with water until the expanding grain split stone along precise lines. Iron chisels dress the faces. Copper saws, fed with abrasive sand, cut where precision matters most. Blocks weighing many tons slide down from the quarry face on earthen ramps, hauled by teams of laborers whose rations the administrative tablets will later record in meticulous detail. The western and southern edges of the terrace require enormous retaining walls. Here the engineers raise courses of limestone ashlar fitted without mortar, each block joined to its neighbor with iron clamps sealed in molten lead. The craftsmanship is extraordinary, joints so tight that a blade cannot pass between them. Behind these facing walls, rubble fill and compacted earth create the body of the platform. Drainage channels cut into the bedrock carry rainwater and snowmelt away from the foundations, preventing the slow catastrophe of water pooling beneath stone. Along the western face, the grand double stairway takes shape. Broad, shallow steps designed so that horses and tribute bearers alike can ascend with dignity. Each step rises only 10 centimeters. Each tread extends deep enough for a measured, ceremonial pace. This is architecture choreographed for procession, for the slow theatrical approach of delegations climbing toward the king. At the terrace's corners and beneath its walls, workers excavate stone boxes, small rectangular cavities cut into bedrock or foundation courses. Into these boxes go the foundation charter tablets, inscribed plaques of gold and silver bearing Darius's declaration in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. The texts announce the king's name, his lineage, and the god Ahura Mazda's blessing upon this work. These are not meant for human eyes. They speak to the earth itself, to the future, to whatever power watches over the permanence of stone. The terrace rises year by year. From the plain below, travelers on the royal road see it growing against the mountain, a geometric cliff of dressed stone where rough hillside stood before. The surface is leveled with extraordinary care, creating a prepared floor upon which palaces and halls will stand. Rock-cut channels run beneath the planned building sites, an invisible infrastructure of drainage that will keep the great structures dry for 2 centuries. The scale is without precedent in the Iranian highlands. Neither Pasargadae nor Susa attempted anything comparable. This is not a citadel designed for defense. The terrace has no military logic, no killing ground, no arrow slits. It is elevation as ideology. To stand upon it is to stand above the world. To climb toward it is to approach something more than human. The terrace transforms geography into hierarchy, stone into statement. By roughly 510 before the Common Era, the platform is substantially complete. Its surface stretches like a vast, empty stage, awaiting the columns and carved facades that will fill it over the next half-century. The mountain rises behind, the plain spreads below, and between them, this immense shelf of human-worked limestone declares that an empire capable of governing 23 nations is equally capable of reshaping the earth beneath its feet. Upon this vast prepared surface, sometime around 515 before the Common Era, the first column bases are set. They are enormous, each a fluted torus of polished grey limestone, seated directly on the bedrock-leveled platform. The building they will support is the Apadana, the great audience hall of Darius, and it will become the architectural heart of everything Persepolis means. The plan is staggering in its ambition. A square hall, roughly 60 meters on each side, will hold 36 interior columns arranged in 6 rows of 6. 3 porticos, north, east, and west, will each add 12 more columns, open to the sky and wind of the plain. 72 columns in total, each rising approximately 19.5 meters from base to capital. Nothing in the ancient Near East has attempted a hypostyle space of this scale since the great temples of Karnak, and those were built across centuries. Darius intends this within a single generation. The column shafts are assembled from drums of limestone, each carefully fluted with 48 shallow channels that catch the raking highland light. Masons shape them on the ground, then raise them into position using earthen ramps and timber levers, the same techniques visible in the construction records preserved on clay tablets elsewhere on the terrace. As each shaft reaches its full height, the capital is fitted, a complex sculptural element unlike anything in Greek or Egyptian tradition. Twin bull protomes face outward in opposite directions, their muscled shoulders and curving horns carved with extraordinary anatomical precision. Between their backs, a saddle-shaped cradle receives the cedar roof beams imported from the forests of Lebanon, transported overland across Mesopotamia and up into the highlands of Fars. Cedar, aromatic, rot-resistant, workable in long spans, is the only timber that can bridge the distances between these widely spaced columns. The beams arrive as trimmed logs, are shaped on site, and laid across the capitals to form a grid supporting a flat roof. The interior, when complete, is a forest of vertical stone shafts crowned by animal sculpture, the ceiling lost in shadow above, the floor a single plane of polished stone reflecting the bodies of those who enter. Before the columns rise, Darius orders foundation deposits placed at the corners of the hall. Stone boxes are cut into the platform and sealed with inscribed gold and silver plaques, thin sheets of precious metal bearing the king's declaration in 3 languages: Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. The texts name Darius as king, invoke Ahura Mazda, and enumerate the lands of the empire. These plaques are not meant to be read again by living eyes. They speak downward, into the earth, anchoring the building's legitimacy in the bedrock itself. The interior space, once roofed, is unlike any room in the ancient world. Light enters only through the open porticos, falling in long shafts between the columns, illuminating dust motes and the polished surfaces of stone. The hall can hold thousands. Ancient estimates suggest 10,000 standing figures, though the true ceremonial capacity is likely smaller. The acoustics are those of a stone grove. Footsteps echo, voices carry in strange patterns between the fluted shafts. The smell is cedar resin and limestone dust, and when the hall is in use, the heavy sweetness of burning incense carried in bronze censers. By 490 before the Common Era, the Apadana stands complete in its essential form. Roof sealed, columns dressed, porticos open to the mountain air. It is the largest roofed space between the Nile and the Indus. Its double bull capitals, visible from the plain below, announce that something unprecedented has been achieved on this terrace. Not merely a palace, but a chamber vast enough to contain the image of universal rule. The empire has given itself a room equal to its own conception of the world. But the Apadana is not only a space to be entered, it is also a surface to be read. Beginning around 490 before the Common Era, and continuing through the reign of Xerxes I into the 470s, master sculptors carve the great staircase facades that flank the northern and eastern approaches to the audience hall. These are not mere decoration. They are the empire's portrait of itself. 23 delegations rendered in limestone with a precision that borders on ethnographic documentation. The eastern staircase rises in 2 symmetrical flights, each panel approximately 3 meters in height. The stone is the local blue-gray limestone of Kuhe Rahmat, dressed to a smooth finish that still holds chisel marks at the edges where the carvers worked. Each delegation occupies its own register, separated by stylized cypress trees. The figures move leftward, ascending toward the enthroned king, a procession frozen mid-step, garments caught in implied motion, gifts held forward with both hands. The Medes lead, closest to the king. They wear rounded caps, knee-length tunics cinched at the waist, and soft leather boots. They bring vessels, torques, and a pair of stallions whose musculature the carvers render with extraordinary anatomical care. The veins along the jaw, the tension in the fetlocks. Behind them come the Elamites, bearing lion cubs and bows. The Armenians bring a horse and a handled vessel. The Babylonians appear in fringed robes and tall headdresses, leading a humped bull whose dewlap hangs heavy, its horns curved forward. Further along the facade, the world widens. The Lydians carry bowls and a chariot model. The Ionians bring folded textiles and shallow offering dishes. The Cappadocians lead a horse draped in a patterned blanket. The Egyptians are identifiable by their kilts and shaved heads, offering fabric and a bull. The Scythians wear pointed caps and trousers, bringing a horse and armlets. The Assyrians carry rams. The Bactrians lead a camel. The Gandharans, from the Indus region, bring axes and a humped zebu. The Ethiopians present an elephant tusk and lead an okapi-like creature that scholars have debated for decades. Each delegation numbers between 2 and 5 figures. Their hair is carved with individual curls or braids depending on ethnic convention. Their footwear varies: sandals, boots, bare feet. The gifts are specific: gold dust in bags, lapis lazuli in bowls, ivory tusks balanced on shoulders, textiles folded with visible fringe. Nothing is generic. The sculptors have observed these peoples or worked from detailed descriptions provided by administrators who knew the provinces. The relief composition is governed by strict formal rules. Figures stand at uniform height regardless of ethnic origin. There is no hierarchy of scale. Spacing between delegations is consistent. The cypress trees that separate groups are identical, their branches carved in tight spirals. This regularity is deliberate. It communicates equality within submission, diversity within unity. Every people brings its finest, and every people walks at the same measured pace toward the same throne. The carving technique is shallow relief. Figures project only a few centimeters from the background plane, yet the illusion of depth is remarkable. Overlapping bodies, turned heads, and layered garment folds create spatial complexity. Tool marks indicate that the rough forms were blocked with pointed chisels, then refined with flat chisels, and finally smoothed with abrasives. Traces of original paint, red, blue, gold, survive in protected crevices, suggesting the entire facade once blazed with color against the pale stone. By the time Xerxes completes the program around 470 before the Common Era, the staircase facades contain more than 1,000 individual human and animal figures. They constitute the largest surviving sculptural program of the ancient Near East. No text accompanies them, no labels, no captions. The images are meant to be self-evident. Anyone ascending these stairs toward the Apadana would see the world itself walking beside them, bearing its wealth upward to the center of all things. Xerxes inherits more than a throne when his father dies around 486 before the Common Era. He inherits a terrace still under construction, a vision only partially realized. Where Darius laid foundations and raised the Apadana, Xerxes will transform the entire platform into a coherent ceremonial landscape, a sequence of monumental spaces through which the empire's subjects must pass, each threshold amplifying the experience of approaching the king. The first structure Xerxes adds is the Gate of All Nations, positioned at the top of the grand double-reversing stairway that ascends the western face of the terrace. It is a square hall, roughly 25 meters on each side, roofed with cedar beams carried on 4 stone columns over 16 meters tall. But what defines this gateway is not its interior. It is the colossal guardian figures flanking its 3 doorways. On the western entrance, 2 enormous bulls stand carved from single blocks of gray limestone, each over 5 meters tall. On the eastern doorway, facing inward toward the terrace, Lamassu figures rise, human-headed winged bulls in the Assyrian tradition, adapted here to Achaemenid scale and style. Their bearded faces wear the crenellated crowns of ancient Mesopotamian kingship. Xerxes places an inscription on the walls in 3 languages, Old Persian, Elamite, Babylonian, declaring that he built this gate by the favor of Ahura Mazda, and that all nations pass through it in peace. Beyond the Gate of All Nations, the visitor emerges onto the terrace proper. To the south stands the Apadana, already complete. But Xerxes turns his attention eastward, where he raises the largest roofed structure Persepolis will ever hold, the throne hall, known also as the Hall of 100 Columns. Its footprint measures approximately 70 by 70 meters. 100 stone columns, each over 14 meters high, support a cedar roof, spanning an interior space of nearly 5,000 square meters. The doorways, 8 in total, are framed with carved reliefs showing the king enthroned, supported by rows of soldiers representing the empire's peoples, or shown in combat with mythic beasts. The northern portico faces a broad courtyard, and carries two massive stone bulls flanking the entrance. This hall serves a different function than the Apadana. Where the Apadana receives delegations in open ceremony, the throne hall appears designed for military audiences, for the display of royal authority before the empire's commanders and garrison officers. The treasury tablets record disbursements to workers constructing this building through the 470s and 460s before the Common Era, indicating a construction period spanning at least 2 decades. Xerxes also builds his own private palace, the Hadish, on the highest point of the southern terrace, elevated above his father's Tachera. Its doorways carry reliefs of the king attended by servants holding parasols and fly whisks. The stone is polished to a dark mirror finish. From its portico, the entire plain of Marv-Dasht spreads below, the Zagros peaks rising blue in the distance. Throughout these constructions, Xerxes leaves inscriptions, more than any other Achaemenid king at this site. They repeat a formula. This was made by the grace of Ahura Mazda, protector of the king and his house. The language is confident, declarative, almost liturgical in its repetition. Stone masons carve these words in trilingual panels beside every major doorway. By the time of Xerxes' assassination around 465 before the Common Era, the terrace has achieved its essential form. The grand stairway, the gate, the Apadana, the throne hall, the royal palaces, the treasury, all stand complete, or nearly so. The platform has become what Darius imagined, not a city for living, but a stage for empire, where stone and cedar and polished surface speak a single message of ordered, universal sovereignty. But the terrace speaks in more than stone. Buried within the northeastern fortification wall, pressed into the mud brick fill during construction around 509 before the Common Era, lies an archive so vast and so detailed that it transforms our understanding of how this empire actually functioned. These are the fortification tablets, over 30,000 clay tablets and fragments inscribed in Elamite cuneiform, recording the daily administrative machinery of the Achaemenid state during the years between approximately 509 and 494 before the Common Era. They are small, most no larger than a human palm. Their surfaces carry the rapid impressions of reed styluses, not the monumental declarations of kings, but the quiet bookkeeping of an empire feeding itself. Each tablet records a transaction, a ration of barley issued to a group of workers, a quantity of wine dispersed to a traveling official, a flock of sheep allocated for a religious ceremony, a sealed authorization permitting a messenger to draw provisions at way stations along the royal road. The language is Elamite, the old administrative tongue of southwestern Iran, employed here as the bureaucratic medium of a Persian empire that governed through inherited scribal traditions. The details are extraordinary. Workers are identified by nationality: Babylonians, Egyptians, Ionians, Carians, Sogdians, Indians. They receive rations calibrated to their labor and status. Women appear throughout the archive, sometimes receiving equal or higher rations than men performing comparable tasks. Mothers receive additional allocations after childbirth. Children are counted and fed. This is not the record of a slave empire. The tablets document a paid, multinational workforce organized with remarkable precision across dozens of sites in the Persepolis region. Seal impressions pressed into the wet clay before firing reveal another layer. Hundreds of distinct seals appear, cylinder seals and stamp seals bearing images of royal heroes grasping lions, winged discs hovering above altars, goats flanking sacred trees. Each seal identifies an official authorized to approve disbursements. The hierarchy is legible. Regional administrators oversee district managers who oversee individual storehouse keepers. Grain flows from collection points on the plain into centralized magazines, then outward again as measured rations. Travel authorizations reveal the road network in operation. A messenger carrying a sealed document from Susa arrives at a way station and presents his tablet. The station keeper issues flour, beer, and meat according to the traveler's rank and the number of his companions. The transaction is recorded on a new tablet, filed, and eventually consolidated into the archive. The royal road between Susa and Persepolis pulses with this documented movement. Couriers, officials, priests, craftsmen, and military personnel, all fed and tracked by the system. Religious expenditures appear with equal regularity. Offerings of sheep, wine, and grain flow to ceremonies honoring not only Ahura Mazda, but also other deities, evidence of the theological pluralism that characterized Achaemenid governance. The tablets name ritual practitioners and specify quantities with the same precision applied to construction rations. Ernst Herzfeld uncovered this archive in 1933, finding the tablets still stacked within the mud brick of the fortification wall, where they had been stored or discarded over 2,400 years earlier. Many had survived intact because the mud brick sealed them from moisture. Others were fragmentary, broken by the weight of centuries. They were sent to the Oriental Institute in Chicago for study, a process that continues into the present day, tablet by tablet, seal impression by seal impression. What the fortification tablets reveal is the nervous system behind the stone facade. The terrace above displays carved delegations in eternal procession. The tablets below record the actual grain, the actual wine, the actual bodies that made the empire function, day by day, ration by ration, seal by seal. Behind every carved relief, behind every polished column, drum, and gilded capital lies the raw fact of material. Stone torn from the mountain, timber felled 1,000 miles away, metal refined from ore carried across half a continent. The terrace does not simply display imperial power. It is made of it, physically, in every block and beam. The limestone comes from Kuhe Rahmat itself. Quarry faces are still visible on the mountain's slopes, scarred where workers cut channels into the rock, using iron chisels and wooden wedges soaked with water, until they swelled and split the stone along its bedding planes. The blocks are massive, some weighing dozens of tons, and they are moved on wooden sledges dragged by teams of laborers down prepared ramps to the terrace below. The distance is short, sometimes only a few hundred meters, but the precision required is extraordinary. Each block must be dressed to fit against its neighbor with joints so tight that no mortar is needed. Stone masons use flat chisels, pointed picks, and abrasive sand to achieve surfaces smooth enough to reflect torchlight. The Tachara's interior walls are polished to a mirror finish that astonishes even modern conservators. But limestone alone cannot roof a hall the size of the Apadana. For that, the empire reaches west, to the mountains of Lebanon, where cedar grows tall and straight and resists rot for centuries. These timbers travel by sea to ports along the Persian Gulf, then overland by cart and sledge to the highland plain. The fortification tablets record rations issued to transport teams moving goods along royal roads, and the logistics of moving 40-foot cedar beams across such distances speak to an infrastructure of way stations, labor pools, and coordinated supply that rivals anything in the ancient world. The beams span the distances between columns, supporting roofs of packed earth and plaster that keep the halls cool in the fierce summer heat of Fars. Gold arrives from multiple directions, from Sardis in Lydia, from Bactria in the far northeast, from the alluvial deposits of the Indus region. It appears as leaf applied to wooden elements, as inlay in carved stone, as the material of the Apadana foundation plaques that Darius buries beneath the corner columns. Silver comes from the same far-flung sources. Lapis lazuli, deep blue and flecked with pyrite, is carried from the mines of Badakhshan in what is now northeastern Afghanistan, a journey of over 2,000 kilometers. The treasury tablets, a smaller archive dating primarily to the reign of Xerxes and into the reign of Artaxerxes I, record payments in silver to workers on the terrace. These are not slaves. They are paid laborers, skilled and unskilled, drawn from across the empire. Ionians carve stone. Egyptians work with wood and possibly with glazed brick. Babylonians contribute expertise in drainage engineering. Carians, Lydians, and peoples from the eastern satrapies appear in the records receiving wages calibrated to skill level. Women appear as well, some earning rations equal to or exceeding those of male workers in comparable roles. The tablets record a workforce organized not by coercion, but by imperial administration, a bureaucracy of grain, wine, beer, and silver that keeps thousands of hands at work across decades. The tools themselves are largely iron, chisels, adzes, saws for cutting stone and wood. Bronze fittings secure timber joints. Scaffolding of wooden poles and rope allows workers to reach the upper registers of columns and reliefs. The double bull capitals that crown the Apadana columns are carved in sections, hoisted into position, and fitted together with iron clamps sealed in lead. Each capital weighs several tons and requires teams of specialized carvers working for months. This is the hidden Persepolis, not the ceremonial facade, but the quarry dust, the cedar shavings, the silver weighed on balance scales, the bread baked in ovens on the plain below for workers who will never see their names carved in stone. The terrace rises not from myth, but from organized labor on a continental scale. Every block a testament to an empire that could move mountains of material across thousands of miles and set them, with astonishing precision, into place. Beyond the monumental halls where empire performs its grandeur, there exist quieter spaces, rooms scaled not to awe delegations, but to shelter kings. The Takara, begun by Darius I around 490 before the Common Era and completed under Xerxes, stands on the southern portion of the terrace as the oldest residential palace on the platform. Its walls are cut from a dark grey limestone, so fine-grained, so meticulously polished, that the surface achieves a mirror-like sheen. In certain light, a figure approaching a doorway would see its own reflection ghosting back from the stone. This is deliberate artistry. The Persians called the Tachara the Winter Palace, and its thick walls and southern exposure suggest a structure designed to hold warmth during the cold months that sweep across the Marv-dashed plain from the Zagros peaks. The doorways of the Tachara carry intimate reliefs quite different from the grand processions of the Apadana staircases. Here the king appears attended by servants holding parasols and fly whisks, or striding forward in royal robes with a lotus blossom in hand. The scale is human. The carving is exquisite, individual curls of the royal beard rendered with obsessive precision, the folds of draped fabric falling with naturalistic weight. These are not scenes of imperial ideology projected outward, but images of royal dignity turned inward, decorating spaces where the king moved in relative privacy. North of the Tachara, elevated on a higher sub-platform, stands the Hadish of Xerxes, a larger residential palace with its own columned hall and private apartments. The Hadish suffered severely in the fire of 330, its wooden roof and ceiling beams feeding the conflagration, but the stone door jambs survive. They show Xerxes himself, taller than his attendants, moving between chambers. The floors here were originally covered with elaborate textiles. The stone beneath shows wear patterns consistent with heavy carpet traffic rather than bare foot on rock. Between and around these palaces, the terrace holds evidence of something unexpected. Gardens. Drainage channels cut into the bedrock carry water from cisterns fed by seasonal streams off the Mountain of Mercy. These channels run not only beneath buildings for waste removal, but along open courts where soil accumulation and root traces suggest planted spaces. The Achaemenid Paradise Garden, the Perideisa from which the word paradise descends, was not merely a feature of lowland royal estates. Even here, on this elevated limestone platform, the kings demanded green life among the grey stone. The palace of Artaxerxes III, added in the mid-4th century before the Common Era on the southwestern terrace, represents the last major royal construction. Its plan is simpler, its reliefs less refined than those of Darius or Xerxes, suggesting either haste or diminished resources, or perhaps simply different aesthetic priorities as the dynasty aged. Yet its presence confirms that the terrace remained a living royal precinct for nearly 2 centuries, continuously inhabited, maintained, and expanded. Water channels connect these structures in a network invisible from the ceremonial approaches. Beneath the polished floors, terracotta pipes carry runoff away from foundations. The engineering is precise, gradients calculated to prevent pooling, junction boxes allowing maintenance access. The terrace breathes through these hidden systems, its stone skin concealing arteries of water management that kept the palaces dry through spring snowmelt and autumn rains. In these private quarters, the smell would have been cedar and incense rather than open air. Lamplight would have fallen on painted plaster walls. Traces of blue and red pigment survive on interior surfaces. The king moved here not as a figure on a cosmic stage, but as a man in rooms, attended by servants whose footsteps wore the stone smooth over generations. The living terrace, warm, planted, watered, lit, existed alongside the ceremonial terrace of cold grandeur, and both were equally Persepolis. Once each year the terrace transforms. The private quarters fall silent, the garden courts empty of their daily rhythms, and the entire limestone platform becomes a stage for the most elaborate ritual performance in the ancient world. This is Nowruz, the new year, and for 2 centuries, from roughly 500 to 330 before the Common Era, the spring equinox draws the empire's representatives up the grand stairway and into the presence of the King of Kings. The timing is precise. When the sun crosses the celestial equator and day balances night, the ceremony begins. Scholars reconstruct the event from the reliefs themselves. The carved processions are not merely decorative, but instructional, depicting the exact choreography of approach. Each delegation ascends in order, led by a Persian or Median usher who grasps the hand of the foremost tribute-bearer. The pace is measured. The stairway's shallow rises, each step only 10 centimeters high, allow robed figures to climb without breaking stride, without lifting hems, without haste. The architecture itself dictates the tempo of empire. Incense rises from bronze burners stationed along the route. The smell of frankincense and myrrh mingles with spring air, carrying the scent of new growth from the plain below. Delegations carry their offerings visibly. Babylonians leading a humped bull, Armenians bearing a stallion, Lydians carrying gold bracelets and a chariot model, Indians presenting vessels of gold dust, Ethiopians offering an elephant tusk and a young okapi. Each gift is ethnographically specific, each garment rendered with precision that allows modern scholars to identify textiles, headgear, and footwear traditions across 23 distinct peoples. At the summit, the Apadana receives them. 72 columns hold the cedar roof above a space vast enough to contain thousands. The king sits elevated on a throne depicted in the reliefs, a platform supported by representatives of the subject nations, each carved figure bearing the seat upon raised hands. This image, repeated at Nakshi Rostam and on royal seals, encodes the ideology. The throne rests upon willing cooperation, not conquest alone. The king holds a lotus blossom and a staff. He does not gesture, he does not move. He is stillness at the center of motion. The immortals, the 10,000-strong royal guard, line the approach in ranks, their spear butts resting on the ground, apple-shaped counterweights gleaming in gold. Their presence is not threat, but frame, defining the sacred geometry of the space. Between the columns, light falls in shafts through clear-story openings, catching dust and smoke, turning the interior into a forest of shadow and gold. No ancient text survives describing the ceremony in full, but the reliefs speak with extraordinary clarity. The cypress trees carved between delegations mark pauses, resting points in the procession's rhythm. Lions attacking bulls in the staircase panels signal the cosmic transition of seasons, the vernal triumph of light. The entire program is legible as liturgy rendered in stone. The treasury tablets hint at the logistical scale. Thousands of workers receive additional rations during what appears to be a festival period. Wine, beer, sheep, and grain are distributed in quantities far exceeding daily norms. The terrace becomes not only a stage but a feast hall, its storerooms disgorging provisions for an event that may have lasted days. When the last delegation withdraws and the offerings are catalogued in the treasury vaults, the terrace returns to its quieter functions. But the stone record remains permanent, cyclical, designed to be read again each year as the procession repeats. Persepolis exists for this moment above all others. Every column, every staircase, every carved figure walks eternally toward the throne, performing an empire that understood power as spectacle, unity as choreography, and architecture as the script of sovereignty itself. But the terrace does not exist alone. Below the limestone platform, spreading across the marve-dashed plain in every direction, lies a settlement that the monumental stairs and carved facades have long overshadowed. a working city of mud brick and packed earth, of bread ovens and drainage ditches, of potters and scribes and soldiers whose daily labor sustains the spectacle above. Archaeological surveys conducted across the plain from the 1960s onward reveal a dense pattern of occupation. Clusters of structures extend south and west of the terrace, their mud brick walls long dissolved into the soil but traceable through surface pottery, grinding stones, and the faint geometric shadows visible in aerial photography. This is not a grand metropolis in the Babylonian sense. There are no paved avenues, no towering ziggurats beyond the terrace edge. Instead, the settlement reads as a functional landscape, residential compounds for administrators and their households, barracks for the garrison troops referenced in the tablets, and extensive workshop zones where the raw materials of empire are processed before ascending the great stairway. The fortification tablets illuminate this lower city with remarkable specificity. Ration disbursements name locations scattered across the surrounding district, granaries at sites called Kuknaka, Besime, Tikranush, places whose exact positions remain debated but whose existence confirms a network of storage and distribution facilities radiating outward from the terrace. Workers receiving barley and wine are stationed not only on the platform itself, but at outlying posts along roads leading toward Susa to the northwest and toward Pasargade to the northeast. The royal road system passes through this landscape, and way stations provide lodging and provisions for official travelers carrying sealed authorizations. Bread ovens appear in the archaeological record as circular clay structures, their interiors fire-blackened, surrounded by ash deposits and carbonized grain. The volume of baking required to feed thousands of workers, soldiers, and visiting delegations demands industrial-scale production. Wheat and barley arrive from the irrigated fields of the plain itself, watered by channels drawing from the Pulva River and seasonal streams descending from the Zagros foothills. The irrigation infrastructure, though modest compared to Mesopotamian canal systems, sustains enough agricultural output to support a permanent population numbering in the thousands during ordinary months and swelling dramatically during the Novruz season. Pottery workshops leave their signature in kiln fragments and waster sherds, vessels cracked or deformed during firing and discarded in refuse heaps. The ceramic repertoire includes storage jars for grain and oil, drinking bowls in standardized sizes matching the ration system documented in the tablets, and finer wares that echo styles from across the empire. Babylonian forms alongside local Fars traditions, evidence of the multinational workforce living and laboring on the plain. Metalworking debris surfaces in specific zones, copper slag, fragments of bronze tools, the residue of small-scale smelting operations that produce fittings, pins, and implements for both construction and daily use. Stone cutting continues in quarry areas along the lower slopes of the Mountain of Mercy, where partially dressed blocks still lie abandoned in their cutting beds, frozen mid-task as though the masons simply walked away. The garrison presence is attested not only by tablet references to soldiers receiving rations, but by the spatial logic of the site itself. The terrace holds the treasury, the royal archives, and the ceremonial heart of the empire. Its protection requires permanent military presence on the plain below, controlling access roads and monitoring the approaches through the mountain passes. This lower settlement possesses no walls of its own. Its defense lies in geography. the mountain barrier to the east, the controlled passes, and the sheer remoteness of the Fars highland from any plausible enemy. For nearly 2 centuries this confidence holds. The plain hums with the routines of imperial maintenance, grain measured, bread baked, clay tablets inscribed, pottery fired, tools sharpened, roads maintained. It is unglamorous work, invisible from the carved staircases above, yet without it the terrace is merely stone. The city on the plain is the living body beneath the ceremonial mask, and its rhythms continue season after season, sustaining an empire that believes itself eternal. That belief in eternity begins to crack. After 424 before the Common Era, when Artaxerxes I dies and succession disputes bleed the royal house, the terrace enters a different era, one of continuation without conviction, of building programs completed by diminished hands. Artaxerxes II ascends after the brief, violent reign of his predecessor. He rules for 45 years, the longest reign of any Achaemenid king, yet his attention turns elsewhere, to the western satrapies, to the Greek cities whose independence gnaws at imperial prestige, to the monumental projects at Susa and Ecbatana that compete with Persepolis for royal investment. The terrace receives maintenance, minor additions, the completion of structures left unfinished by earlier kings. But the creative energy that drove Darius and Xerxes to raise forests of columns has dissipated. The master carvers still work, their techniques inherited across generations, yet fewer commissions arrive. Some relief panels on secondary structures remain roughed out but never finished, the figures blocked in outline, their garments unsculpted, their tribute gifts mere suggestions in the stone. Egypt breaks away in 404 before the Common Era, declaring independence under native pharaohs. For 60 years the empire cannot recover its richest satrapy. Satraps in Anatolia rebel openly in the 360s, coordinating resistance against the central throne. The great satrap's revolt shakes the western provinces. Persepolis, deep in the Fars heartland, remains physically untouched by these convulsions, yet the administrative tablets thin, the workforce contracts, the seasonal rhythms of construction slow. Artaxerxes III, ascending around 359, proves the last vigorous builder king. He reconquers Egypt in 343 through brutal campaigning, restoring the empire's territorial wholeness for a final generation. At Persepolis he commissions a palace on the southern terrace, smaller than the Tachara, less refined than the Hadish, but asserting dynastic continuity through familiar architectural grammar. His tomb is cut into the limestone cliff at Naksh-e-Rostam, 4 kilometers to the northwest, joining those of Darius, Xerxes, and Artaxerxes I in the sacred rock face. The cruciform facade follows the established pattern, the king standing before a fire altar, supported by rows of throne-bearing peoples. But the carving lacks the crisp depth of the earlier tombs. The artisans know the forms. They no longer possess the resources or the time that perfection demands. When Artaxerxes III is poisoned around 338, the dynasty collapses into fratricide. His son Arses rules barely 2 years before the eunuch Bagoas engineers another murder. Darius III, a distant cousin, takes the throne in 336. The same year a young Macedonian king named Alexander inherits his father's army and his father's war plans. On the terrace, the unfinished reliefs remain unfinished. No new foundation deposits are laid. The treasury still holds its accumulated centuries of tribute gold, but no fresh commissions transform metal into art. The Novruz processions presumably continue. The ritual calendar does not acknowledge political weakness, yet the delegations arriving from rebellious or recently reconquered provinces must carry a different weight now. The choreography of unity performs before a throne whose occupant knows the western horizon darkens. The plain below still functions. Bread is still baked, rations still distributed, roads still maintained. But the empire that believed itself eternal has begun consuming its own body. The terrace stands complete in its essential form. The Apadana, the throne hall, the gates, the palaces, the staircases with their 23 stone delegations still walking forever upward. It awaits only what comes next. And what comes next crosses the Zagros passes with 35,000 Macedonian soldiers in the autumn of 331 before the Common Era, moving east after the ruin at Gaugamela, moving toward the treasury, toward the cedar roofs, toward the fire. They come through the Persian gates in January of 330 before the Common Era. The pass through the Zagros had cost them. Ariobarzanes and his garrison held the narrow defile until a flanking path was found, and Macedonian dead lay among the rocks. But the resistance breaks, and the army descends onto the marv-dashed plain with nothing between it and the terrace but flat ground and winter light. Alexander reaches Persepolis with the speed of a conqueror who knows that treasure, not territory, fuels his eastward march. The plain settlements offer no defense, the garrison quarters empty. The workers who once received their rations of grain and beer have scattered into the surrounding villages or fled toward the mountains. The great stairway that once bore 23 delegations in ritual procession now receives Macedonian boots, Thessalian cavalry officers, companion guards in bronze and linen. They ascend the same shallow steps carved for dignitaries bearing Babylonian bulls and Ethiopian ivory, but they carry sarissas and the momentum of Gaugamela. The treasury vaults lie in the southeastern quarter of the terrace. What the Macedonians find inside staggers even men who have already looted Susa. Ancient sources speak of 120,000 talents of bullion. Diodorus Siculus records the figure. Plutarch confirms the scale. The logistics of removal require 5,000 camels and 20,000 mules, a baggage train that stretches across the plain like a second army. Gold darics stamped with the image of the archer king, silver vessels from Lydian workshops, ceremonial weapons inlaid with lapis lazuli, ivory furniture from Egyptian tribute, generations of Achaemenid wealth accumulated since the reign of Darius I, never spent because Persepolis was never a city that purchased anything. It was a city that received. For 4 months the army remains. The terrace becomes a garrison. Soldiers camp in the throne hall among its 100 columns. The polished limestone of the Tachara reflects firelight from cooking fires that blacken its mirror surfaces. The cedar beams overhead, imported from Lebanon at enormous cost a century and a half earlier, still hold the weight of the roof, still smell faintly of resin in the cold highland air. Then, in May, fire. Whether it begins as deliberate policy, retribution for Xerxes' burning of the Athenian Acropolis 150 years before, or erupts from a banquet turned reckless, the ancient sources disagree. Diodorus describes a courtesan named Thais urging the act. Arrian suggests calculated destruction, The archaeology offers no opinion on motive, only evidence of result. The fire layer is unmistakable in excavation, a stratum of charred cedar, collapsed mud brick, heat-cracked limestone, and melted metal fittings that seals the Achaemenid phase beneath ash. The cedar roofs catch first. Resinous wood, dry from the highland climate, burns fast and hot. The Apadana's great beams, each one shipped from the Levantine coast, dragged over mountain passes, raised by scaffolding to a height of nearly 20 meters, collapse inward, bringing roof tiles and painted plaster down onto the stone floor. The throne hall follows. The Hadish of Xerxes, the private palaces, the corridors connecting treasury to audience hall, all structures with wooden roofing and ceiling elements, feed the conflagration. Column drums crack from thermal shock. Gold leaf melts and runs into crevices between paving stones, where archaeologists will find it 23 centuries later as thin metallic traces. By morning, the terrace is gutted. The stone walls stand, limestone does not burn, but everything above the lintels is gone. The columns of the Apadana remain upright, 13 of them enduring into the modern era, but they hold nothing. The double bull capitals stare over roofless halls. The staircase reliefs survive because they face outward, shielded from the interior blaze by the mass of the terrace wall itself. The 23 delegations continue their eternal climb, untouched, bearing gifts to a throne that no longer exists. Alexander marches east within weeks, pursuing Darius III toward Ecbatana. He never returns. The terrace smoulders, cools, and begins its long silence. Rain enters where roofs once sheltered kings. Dust settles on the treasury floor. The plain below continues its seasonal rhythms, planting, harvest, the streams from Kuhe-Rahmat still flowing, but no one ascends the great stairway bearing tribute again. The silence deepens with each passing decade. No royal decree orders reconstruction. No treasury funds the cutting of new stone or the import of cedar beams from distant Lebanon. The terrace simply exists, open to the sky, its blackened column stumps rising from floors littered with roof debris and cracked plaster. The Seleucid governors who inherit Alexander's eastern provinces establish their administrative centers elsewhere, at Istakhr, barely 3 kilometers to the north, where a living town grows beside the river. The terrace becomes a quarry of convenience, its dressed stones carried away for newer walls, its bronze fittings melted for reuse. Yet the platform itself resists. The retaining walls that Darius's engineers built to hold the mountain's weight stand firm century after century. The grand stairway remains passable. The relief carvings, protected by their orientation against the terrace mass, endure wind and rain with the patience of stone that was polished to mirror smoothness. Travelers crossing the Marv-dashed plain cannot miss the silhouette. Those 13 surviving columns of the Apadana, visible for kilometers, standing like petrified sentinels above the flatland. When the Parthian Arsacids rule Iran, the terrace receives occasional visitors but no restoration. Then the Sasanian dynasty rises in the 3rd century of the Common Era, and something remarkable occurs. These new Persian kings, claiming descent from the Achaemenid bloodline, choose the cliffs of Nakshi-Rostam, barely 6 kilometers from the terrace, to carve their monumental rock reliefs. Shapur I depicts his triumph over the Roman Emperor Valerian there, directly beneath the tomb of Darius the Great. The Sasanians know these ruins belong to their ancestors, They add inscriptions in Middle Persian on the terrace walls, yet even they do not rebuild. The complex is too vast, its original purpose too specific to an empire that governed through annual tribute ceremony. The Sasanians honor it as a relic, not a living space. After the Arab conquest of Iran in the 7th century, the connection between the ruins and their Achaemenid builders dissolves entirely. Local memory performs its own archaeology, reaching not for historical kings, but for mythic ones. The terrace becomes Takht-e-Jamshid, the throne of Jamshid, attributed to the legendary king of the Shahnameh, who ruled over demons and commanded the world's creatures. The carved delegations on the staircase, those 23 peoples bearing tribute, transform in popular imagination into Jamshid's supernatural court. The cuneiform inscriptions above doorways become indecipherable marks, their trilingual messages locked behind a script no living person can read. Medieval geographers note the site with varying accuracy. Ibn Balkhi, writing his Farsnama in the 12th century, describes the ruins and their carved figures with genuine attention, recording local traditions about Jamshid and Solomon. Arab travelers mention columns and stone animals, but no one connects these remains to the historical Achaemenid dynasty described in Greek sources. The two traditions, classical European knowledge of Persepolis through Plutarch and Diodorus, and local Iranian memory of Takht-e-Jamshid, exist in parallel, unjoined for more than 1,000 years. Wind erosion slowly rounds the edges of relief carvings. Winter rains carry dissolved minerals across stone faces, staining them ochre and grey. Earthquakes shake loose what fire weakened. Column drums shift on their bases. The drainage channels that Darius's engineers cut into bedrock continue to function, carrying rainwater away from foundations, preserving the platform's structural integrity even as everything above it crumbles. The mountain behind, Ku'e-Rahmat, sheds its seasonal streams, as it always has, indifferent to the silence below. By the 15th and 16th centuries, the ruins stand much as early modern travelers will find them. The terrace intact, the staircase reliefs legible, the columns reduced but upright, the palaces roofless and sand-filled. 19 centuries of forgetting have not erased the site. They have only made it illegible, a monumental text awaiting translation, its stone alphabet patient beneath the Iranian sky. The first European to read the stones correctly arrives in 1618. Don Pedro Garcia de Silva Figueroa, ambassador of Spain to the Safavid court, approaches the terrace from the plain and recognizes what local tradition has obscured for centuries. These are not the palaces of Jamshid. They are Persepolis, the city Greek historians described, the capital Alexander burned. He notes the staircase reliefs, the standing columns, the inscriptions in a script no one can yet decipher. His identification, published posthumously, reopens a door that had been sealed by 13 centuries of legend. Others follow. In 1665, Jean Chardin spends days among the ruins, sketching column bases and copying inscriptions with painstaking care. His published engravings carry the image of Persepolis into European salons and scholarly libraries. In 1765, Carsten Niebuhr arrives with surveying instruments and produces the first accurate ground plan of the terrace, measuring distances between columns, recording the orientation of stairways, mapping the relationship between structures that had seemed random to earlier visitors. His copies of the trilingual inscriptions at the site will prove essential decades later when Georg Friedrich Grotefend begins cracking Old Persian cuneiform in 1802. By the 1840s, Eugène Flandin and Pascal Coste produce magnificent folio volumes of architectural drawings. Every tribute bearer, every lotus petal, every crenellation rendered with draftsmanly precision. The reliefs enter European consciousness as masterworks of ancient art. Yet no one digs. The terrace remains unexcavated, its buried structures unknown, its archives sealed within fortification walls. That changes in 1931. Ernst Herzfeld, a German archaeologist working under the auspices of the Oriental Institute of Chicago, begins the first systematic excavation of Persepolis. His trenches cut through centuries of accumulated debris. The Apadana staircase reliefs, long visible in their upper registers, reveal their full extent as rubble is cleared from their bases. Delegation after delegation emerging from the earth with gifts intact in carved hands. The precision of the carving astonishes even those who knew the site from photographs. Horses' manes fall in individual strands. Fabric folds follow the logic of real textiles. Then, in 1933, Herzfeld's workers break into a chamber within the northeastern fortification wall and discover something unprecedented. Tens of thousands of clay tablets and fragments inscribed in Elamite cuneiform. The fortification tablets, administrative records dating to between 509 and 494 before the Common Era, constitute the largest single archive ever recovered from the Achaemenid period. They record rations of grain, wine, and beer issued to workers, travel authorizations for officials moving between provinces, payments to laborers of dozens of nationalities. The empire's daily bookkeeping, preserved by the very fire that destroyed the upper city. Herzfeld departs in 1934. Erich Schmidt takes over and continues through 1939, bringing aerial photography to the project for the first time. His cameras, mounted on aircraft circling above the plain, capture the full terrace plan as no ground survey could, revealing the geometric logic of Darius's layout, the axial relationships between halls, the drainage network threading beneath every structure. Schmidt excavates the treasury, the throne hall foundations, and the garrison quarters. He documents column bases still in their original positions, fire-reddened stone marking the exact boundary of Alexander's conflagration. By the time the Second World War halts fieldwork, the essential plan of Persepolis is known. The terrace has yielded its architecture, its art, and its archives. What had been a romantic ruin, sketched by ambassadors and adventurers, has become a legible document of imperial administration, artistic ambition, and catastrophic destruction. The stones that waited 19 centuries beneath the Mountain of Mercy have finally found their translators. After the war, the work resumes under Iranian stewardship. The Iranian Archaeological Service, later joined by the Italian Institute for the Middle and Far East, continues excavation and conservation through the 1950s and 60s. They clear the southern terrace structures, stabilize leaning columns, and document thousands of relief fragments scattered by centuries of earthquake and erosion. The focus shifts from discovery to preservation, how to protect soft limestone from wind abrasion, salt crystallization, and the slow chemical assault of rain on surfaces carved 25 centuries ago. In 1979, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization inscribes Persepolis on the World Heritage List, recognizing it as an outstanding testimony to the Achaemenid civilization. The designation brings international attention and conservation frameworks, but also new pressures. Tourism increases. Footfall wears the staircase treads. Vibration from nearby roads threatens foundations. Iranian conservators develop protective canopies for the most vulnerable reliefs and restrict access to fragile palace interiors. The work is patient, seasonal, unending, a negotiation between visibility and survival. Meanwhile, in Chicago, the Persepolis Fortification Archive project undertakes a decades-long effort to read, photograph, and publish the tens of thousands of Elamite tablets and fragments that Herzfeld shipped to the Oriental Institute in 1936. Advanced imaging techniques, polynomial texture mapping, reflectance transformation, reveal seal impressions and incised signs invisible to the naked eye. Each tablet decoded adds another line to the ledger of empire. A ration of wine issued to a woman named Erdabama, who managed her own estate. A travel authorization for a messenger riding from Susa to Persepolis in 14 days. A payment of silver to Carian stonecutters working the terrace walls. The archive reveals an administration that functioned in multiple languages, employed women in supervisory roles, and paid its laborers rather than enslaving them. This is not the despotic Orient of Greek imagination. It is a bureaucratic state of startling complexity and, in certain domains, surprising equity. At dawn today, the 13 surviving columns of the Apadana catch the first light above the plain. Their fluted shafts rise without roofs, without capitals in most cases, but their vertical rhythm still communicates the scale Darius intended. Along the northern staircase, the 23 delegations continue their eternal procession, Median nobles in rounded caps leading horses, Babylonians carrying textiles and bulls, Ethiopians presenting an okapi, Indians bearing gold dust in bags. Wind and water have softened their edges. Noses have worn away. Folds of carved drapery have blurred. But the compositional clarity endures. An empire that chose to represent itself not through scenes of conquest, but through the willing approach of diverse peoples bearing gifts. No army marches here. No enemy kneels in defeat. The message carved into this stone is one of ordered plurality, an imperial ideal, certainly propagandistic, yet remarkable in its chosen vocabulary. The stones still speak, though their language requires patience. They speak of an empire that governed from the Indus to the Nile not solely by force, but by administrative integration, of a king who paid his workers in silver and beer and recorded every transaction, of architects who raised columns 19 meters high without mortar and fitted limestone blocks so precisely that joints remain invisible after 2.5 millennia. They speak also of fragility, of how a single night of fire could erase what generations built, and how silence could bury what fire spared. Persepolis endures as both monument and warning, the greatest ceremonial stage the ancient world produced, and the proof that no empire, however vast its terrace or refined its carvings, outlasts the forces that move through history like wind across an open plain. Thank you for walking these ancient stones across all 15 chapters. If this journey through the deep past moved you, consider subscribing so you will not miss the next city we bring back from silence.